Sega's Valkyria Chronicles franchise can't seem to fully find success. Each release has been positively received, but various factors have led to them not reaching the sales potential the publisher feels like they deserve. So it's not surprising that their faith in the brand has at times been shaken, contributing to situations like Valkyria Chronicles 3 not getting localized, as well as the creation of a game that doesn't fit the traditional strategy RPG roots of the series, Valkyria Revolution. This action RPG is a reimagining of the franchise. Since turn-based strategy is a core component of the main series, people were pretty upset at this change of approach. However, developer Media Vision, who worked on the PSP games and the Wild Arms series, didn't just make a hack-and-slash RPG and slap the Valkyria name on it. This game uses an active time battle system to pace the player's actions, so characters move in real time, but have to wait for their action bar to fill before acting. Pulling up the skill wheel freezes time to select sub-weapons, abilities, spells, and items. Standard attacks aren't on this wheel, instead being executed by a single button press, which initiates an entire combo. This results in something that feels strangely hands-off, despite the player having direct control over their character. This isn't what makes Valkyria Revolution stand out, though. The mechanic that defines this game is morale management. What the player does on the battlefield not only affects their own team's capabilities, but also the state of their enemies. Shattering formations, blinding foes, killing key leaders, along with various other tactical considerations, results in an ever-growing change in the capabilities of the combatants on the field. Meanwhile, foes can do the same by occupying your bases, in addition to debilitating your party members. It has a cascading effect where someone getting knocked down doesn't just impact your resource pool when recovering HP or reviving them. Their casualty also results in the rest of your team losing some capability due to the hit in morale, even if that downed member is fully revived and healed. The push and pull between opposing sides is represented by a bar on the top of the screen. How this bar leans correlates with your team's offensive as well as defensive stats, along with how often you can act. Early on, this mechanic doesn't matter that much. The player and enemies have limited resources to work with, meaning these encounters are fairly straightforward, which makes the first 10 or so hours kind of dull. Yet as the game goes on, even the most basic units, whom previously could be wiped out in a single combo, start soaking up significantly more damage without some sort of conditioning ahead of time. When successfully manipulating morale, it's incredibly satisfying debuffing foes and using area of effect skills and wiping out large swaths of them in a single strike. But it can also make for some incredibly tense encounters as you try to rebuild your standing after a sudden shift puts you at a significant disadvantage. However, you can also end up in some extreme situations where one side has such a lead that it can feel a bit broken. Encounters can be trivialized to the point where essentially enemies can't even attack, or missions can become excruciatingly difficult and lengthy as you try to pick up the pieces of a botched operation, with little opportunity to regain the upper hand. There's a limited number of maps, along with a system that pushes you to do a variety of repeatable non-story based quests. With these, you'll return to the same locations with similar enemy setups many times over. Depending on who you are, this can be pretty repetitive as well as bothersome. I find utilizing the morale system to optimize these runs satisfying, especially since they provide valuable items that can be used for leveling weapons or learning new skills in addition to spells. The game has a deep investment in this morale concept, which bleeds into the story, as much of the plot is about how the nation's people view themselves and the effects that has on their drive to fight. Up front, Valkyria Revolution feels faithful to the series, with the initial cast introduced being the Anti-Valkyria Squad, a specialized military group for the small nation of Jutland. They're fighting against a world power called the Ruzi Empire, who threatens their sovereignty. The squad features the upfront personalities that push not only the more action-oriented story elements, but the more personal tales that flesh out how the war impacts soldiers and civilians day by day. As you might expect from the series, there's plenty of goofy dialogue, internal conflicts, in addition to battlefield interactions between these characters, though the reduced cast size compared to a traditional Valkyria game does mean they get more attention, so they feel a lot more central to the storytelling. Feel a lot more central being the key phrase here, because weirdly enough, despite the increased focus on them, they still have little effect on where the plot goes. Instead, the core story follows an entirely different group. Amlet, the main character and captain of the squad, is not aligned with this country, but the Circle of Five, a secret group of individuals pulling the strings of the entire nation. They manipulate government, military, press, intelligence, in addition to businesses through powerful roles that they've planted themselves in. They knowingly sparked the war to fulfill a personal vendetta against the Ruzi Emperor. The Circle of Five's struggle to manage Jutland citizens' rising and falling morale is the main focus of the plot, which is kind of interesting since the group very rarely interacts with the core squad outside of Amleth, who is one of the five himself. Their conflicts expand the scope of what a typical Valkyria game would deal with. Other titles in the series often give a glimpse of the invading empire's internal politics, though largely as an excuse to build the character of certain antagonists. Valkyria Revolution does this as well, but also wraps in neighboring nations and far-off world powers. While these countries rarely have identifiable characters, they play a big role in the Circle of Five's conflicts. For example, as the war drags on, Jutland overtakes various oppressed nations in the name of liberation, which results in some external parties viewing their actions as invasive. It affects how the greater world power sees the country, which bleeds down to how the citizens see themselves. This results in the five having to use their influence to change the narrative of the war back in their favor, even if it doesn't do much to change their real position in the conflict or affect the encounters that Amleth is leading unless it's for a symbolic victory. Despite this separation of narrative priority between the Circle of Five and the anti-Valkyria squad, they are still both portrayed with the same level of detail. The cutscenes about the divorced father in the squad trying to impress his son gets as much attention as the war room meetings that decide the fate of the nation. As impressive as this complete realization of a top-to-bottom portrayal of war is, it kind of falls apart in the end because it lacks substance. The plot points and dialogue used are often overly simple in their portrayal. Whether or not the Circle of Five should have started the war in the first place is a constant question, yet the answer is painfully obvious. Nevertheless, it is continually debated at the lowest level of discourse possible. Or things like the battle over the perception of Jutland's War of Liberation versus invasion coming down to arguments on the literal definition of those two words, rather than some greater dialogue about the actions of their nation. It often drags its feet to coming to conclusions, even though it frequently has almost fairy tale-like solutions to many of its problems. I think this overly simple execution of the story burns a lot of goodwill with players sitting through it, as it makes the moment-to-moment details pretty dull. Combine that with a slow ramp-up of the more unique mechanics, along with a swing and challenge level due to the extreme morale influences, and you have some real problems with this game. Though I do think people may have been a little too hard on it, partly due to the uncertainty of the franchise's future when it released. I personally think the Metacritic aggregate score of 54 is quite a bit lower than it should be, but hey, I'm just another voice on the internet here. The core concepts shine through enough that both the story and gameplay feels fresh as well as satisfying, while still being faithful to the Valkyria name. Given the poor reception of Valkyria Revolution, as well as the release of a numbered sequel with Valkyria Chronicles 4 afterwards, I don't think there's any real possibility of them doing anything further with this branch of the franchise. Still, I'm glad it exists as a different take on what the series can be. Thanks for watching. One Controller Port has a focus on games with a notable place in history, as well as titles with a distinct take on a franchise or genre. If you enjoyed the video, please like, subscribe, and visit onecontrollerport.com for videos, podcasts, streams, and articles. If you're interested in more, I'll link a video that's about the Wizard of Oz RPG by the same developer. Or if you want to hear another hot take I have on a game, I'll link my largely positive review of Mighty No. 9.